This is a picture of an Eckankar meeting. The caption reads, Eckankar took off like wildfire, growing from 3 students to thousands in less than 3 years. And this was an article that was published on June 22nd, 1995 by author Dodie Bellamy, who's a former Eckankar member, and this is their article revisiting the movement. I think it is important that we read it today as part of our case study into Eckankar as a religious cult.
Karma's a bitch.
Queen of Karma.
We use more discriminating intelligence when we buy a used car than when we buy a religion, says philosophy professor and cult buster David Christopher Lane. Buying a used car, you at least look underneath the hood. Hit the tires. Maybe take it to a mechanic to check it out. But in buying a religion, you're supposed to wear these narrow blinders so that if anybody disagrees, you can block it out. It's basically check your brains at the door when you join a religion. For the past 20 years, Lane's books and articles accusing several new religious movements of plagiarisms, lies, inconsistencies, and scandals have raised a fury among true believers. According to Lane, members of various cults have threatened lawsuits, written him letters with skeletons on them, broken into his apartment, made death threats, and generally harassed him. Lane's no longer an easy man to find. He lives in the San Diego area, but the location is a closely guarded secret. He has no phone. I actually kept my phone for years, explains Lane, until one night when you're asleep and you've got to get up at 4 a.m. and go to school, you get a phone call saying, we're gonna fucking kill you. You know what I mean? It gets tiresome. For 10 years, I was a member of Eckankar, one of the groups Lane has written about most extensively. His critique was instrumental in my dropping out of Eckankar in the early 80s. I anticipate our talk with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Apparently, Lane has equally conflicted feelings about me. Initially, he refuses to come to the Hillcrest home where I'm staying, preferring to meet in a nearby restaurant. Since I don't want to play the awkward game of trying to figure out who one another is in public, I haggle. I'm worried about getting lost, he says, exasperated, but it's just a few blocks off university. Finally, he agrees to come to the house, but I'm doubtful that he will really appear. With only a post office box and an answering service to connect me to him, Lane seems as slippery as Houdini. With the blink of an eye, he could vanish forever. Lane does arrive at 1 o'clock Thursday afternoon, on time to the minute. I open the door to a boyish 38-year-old with a full head of healthy brown hair. He's told me he surfs, and in his knee-high khaki shorts, plum-colored t-shirt, and sandals, he looks like a surfer. His clothes seem to be tossed onto his rather stocky body. He extends his hand and smiles broadly. Hi, I'm Dave. Sizing up his clean, homogenized attractiveness, I think, tuck in his shirt and he could be on one of those infomercials, beside a pool selling motivational tapes, how to lose weight, gain friends, make it rich in real estate with no money down. We spend roughly 9 hours together, spread over 2 days, sitting at a table outside Monsoon at Village Hillcrest surrounded by potted plants and curving walls of mango orange, gold deep purple, and rusty red. Lane sips a Coke and tells me the history of his involvement with alternative religious movements. At 17, Lane, who was raised Catholic in the San Fernando Valley, became interested in Radhasoami, a branch of Surat Shab yoga founded in India in the 19th century. In 1978, after 5 years of study, he was initiated into Radhasoami in India by the late Maharaj Charan Singh. In 1977, noting the similarities between Radhasoami and Eckankar, a religious movement founded in San Diego in 1965 by the late Paul Twitchell, Lane wrote a term paper comparing the two for an undergraduate religious studies class at California State University, Northridge. In the course of his research, Lane discovered information that led him to believe that Twitchell copied whole chapters from these texts, lied about biographical details, and misled people concerning the origin origin of Eckankar's doctrines. Lane leans across the cafe table, excitedly tapping a straw. I found all this fun, interesting stuff. I talked to Twitchell's first wife. Nobody knew he'd been married before. I was excited, 20 years old, in the moment of discovering something new. I had huge phone bills because I had called this professor or this person, so I sent my term paper to Eckankar. And then they turned around 2 months later and said they were going to sue me if I published it. So I'm not scared of attorneys. My family is full of attorneys. Naturally, the threat made me want to do more research. If they're going to sue you about a 120-page term paper when you're 20 years old, you know something's up. The following year, Lane wrote a second paper, The Making of a Spiritual Movement, the untold story of Paul Twitchell and Eckankar. I was obsessed, Lane admits. I was on the holy grail of research. Through a process that Lane himself does not completely understand, someone photocopied this manuscript and circulated it around the country. As the great Houdini wrote, the yellow thread of exposure seems to be inextricably woven into all fabrics whose strength is secrecy. Houdini, like Lane, was a man whose obsessions drove him to expose religious frauds. James Peebles, an Eckist and fellow classmate of Lane's, also wrote a paper on Eckankar. The two students shared notes. Peebles, said Lane, got so disgruntled when he realized there was some kind of fraud being perpetrated that he wrote Eckankar himself about these findings. Peebles returned to his Baptist roots and sent his paper to Professor Ed Gruss of the Los Angeles Baptist College. An Eckankar representative, claiming to be a member of the Berkeley-based anti-cult group Spiritual Counterfeits Project, asked Gruss for a copy of Peebles' report. The report made claims of tax irregularities and personal misconduct by an Eckankar leader. Eckankar then threatened Gruss with a $2.5 million lawsuit for publishing Peebles' paper for making a photocopy of it. In the meantime, Lane graduated from Northridge, visited India, and enrolled at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, where in 1979 he met Brian Walsh. He wanted to make my research more available, so he put up $1,000 and out comes this funky, Xeroxed, self-published book with a weird cover. Within 3 weeks of its publication, The Making of a Spiritual Movement sold out. Around the same time, the Spiritual Counterfeits Project published its own journal, Eckankar, a hard look at a new religion, based largely on Lane's manuscript, which they distributed to nearly every ex-center in the world. Disillusioned Eckist left the movement in droves. Eckankar set up a meeting with Lane at its international headquarters in Menlo Park. Were you nervous? I asked. No, I was excited that somebody would pay attention to my research, Lane exclaims. I think they expected somebody who was more academic looking. This was 79, 15 years ago. At the time this was published, of course. Way longer now. I looked like a little kid. I'm a surfer, so I had this surfer hair and a turtleneck. They were dressed up in suits. They had this little tape recorder, and I was impressed. I thought it was very professional. And they looked at me like, what's this geek doing? We sat down, and they were really uptight, because they knew the impact of my research. So I said, you guys can get out of this simply. Just explain that Twitchell plagiarized. And just explain that Twitchell covered up his life. The upshot of it was, they didn't do anything. Lane tried in vain to place his controversial book with a major publisher. In 1983, Lane and Brian Walsh issued a glossier version of The Making of a Spiritual Movement through their own Del Mar Press. Eckankar threatened a lawsuit for the inappropriate use of their trademark symbol on the book's cover. With the popularity of the Ghostbusters logo, Lane and Walsh had put a circle with a slash through it over Eckankar's logo, which is Eck formed into a circle. Del Mar Press agreed to change the cover on future editions. The Making of a Spiritual Movement, which is not advertised or available in bookstores, has sold more than 10,000 copies. Finally, in 1992, Garland, a publisher of hardback reference books, accepted Lane's manuscript for its library series. Eckankar got wind of the new edition, and their lawyers began corresponding with Garland. Although the book was already typeset, Garland decided to withdraw it. Lane's green eyes turned serious. Be very careful with Eckankar. When they find out you're talking to me, I guarantee that their lawyers will write. I'm sure of it. He taps his finger on the table. Actually, Eckankar is the one who has kept me going because they keep after me every time I try to come out with something. They sent letters about me claiming I was the negative force that I was predicted from the beginning of mankind. In just one of Paul Twitchell's books, The Far Country, Lane claims to have found more than 400 plagiarized paragraphs. Lane smiles to himself as if he were envisioning Paul Twitchell hunched over some Radhashwami text scribbling away. I don't mean just an idea or a thought. I'm talking about the reproduction of grammatical mistakes, semicolon misuse. I'm talking about the very form of that truth being copied, not the truth itself. I don't know what that is. So who was this mysterious Paul Twitchell? He claimed to have been born on a boat on the Mississippi a few minutes after a great earthquake shook the Mid-South and formed a lake in its wake. Such a quake did occur in 1812. Twitchell told his second wife, Gail, that he was born in the early 20s. Lane's research indicates, however, that Twitchell was born between 1908 and 1912 in Paducah, Kentucky. During the 30s and 40s, Twitchell was a prolific writer. He's listed in Ripley's Believe It or Not as having sold an article every day. The Courier Journal magazine, to which he was a regular contributor, reported that he sold 1,800 stories and articles in 3 years. In 1942, after a stint in the Navy, Twitchell moved to New York, where he continued his journalism career, attended many churches, and read extensively on spiritual subjects. A job as a correspondent for our Navy took him to Washington, D.C. in 1945. There he and his first wife, Camille, joined the Self-Revelation Church of Absolute Monism, a system of yoga founded by Swami Premananda. In 1950, the Twitchells moved to the church compounds, but 5 years later, Twitchell was asked to leave the church for personal misconduct. That same year, he and his wife separated. Their divorce was final in 1960. After leaving the Self-Revelation Church, Twitchell dove into the Radhashwami movement. Radhashwami is a yogic teaching that, according to Lane, is designed to enable the soul or consciousness to ascend beyond the physical body to higher spiritual regions by means of an internal sound or life current. Central to the teachings, continues Lane, is the necessity of a living human master, competent in initiating disciples into the practice and technique of listening to the inner sound, contemplating the inner light, and leaving the human body at will. The Indian guru, Kirpal Singh, figures prominently in Twitchell's early writing. 8 years later, he broke with Kirpal Singh and thereafter denied any involvement with him. In the late 50s, Twitchell also became a staff member of L. Ron Hubbard's Church of Scientology, another association that would later be denied. Twitchell married his second wife, Gail Atkinson, in San Francisco in 1964. Shortly afterward, Twitchell claimed a 500-year-old Tibetan monk, Rebazar Tars, appeared to him and instructed him to move to San Diego. Twitchell was living in Point Loma in 1965 when he started teaching workshops and selling booklets on how to leave your body. On October 22, 1965, Twitchell claimed to have received the Rod of Power from Rebazar Tars, becoming the 971st living Eckmaster. Eckankar, the ancient science of soul travel, was officially founded. For a year and a half or 2 years, says Lane, it was a shoestring operation. He was advertising in Fate magazine, Orion magazine, Cosmic Star. In one article Lane shows me, Twitchell is reported to have piercing blue eyes, to sleep only 4 hours a night, to read 5,000 words a minute, to eat little, and to have the ability to be in all places at the same time. Eckankar took off like wildfire, growing from 3 students to thousands in less than 3 years. Today, it is perhaps the most successful religious movement to come out of the 60s, claiming a worldwide membership in the tens of thousands. The teachings of Eckankar are presented to the public through books, free brochures, advertised meetings and lectures, and of course, word of mouth. According to one brochure, which invites me to experience the miracle of spiritual growth and to climb the stairway to spiritual freedom, Eckankar membership is said to be renewable on a yearly basis. Members receive a monthly discourse, which they have the option of studying alone or in classes. The suggested annual membership donation for individuals is $120, a bargain in the Miracles in Freedom market. A representative at the Eckankar International office assured me that no one is turned away for lack of funds. Eckankar, which is now called the religion of light and sound, teaches that each individual is soul inhabiting a human body. Soul, being a spark of God, is on a journey to find its way home to God, or the Sugment. Eckankar is the most direct path to becoming a co-worker with the Sugment. Initiations link soul to the Ek, Holy Spirit, which can be seen as light and heard as sound. Followers of Eckankar believe that beyond the physical world, there are many other realms existing at higher vibratory rates. Through daily spiritual exercises, one can shift one's awareness from the physical world and soul travel to these higher planes. In order to burn off all their karma in this lifetime and to be released from the cycle of death and reincarnation, Eckists practice detachment from the vagaries of life. This is not seen as coldness or indifference, but as a precursor to unconditional love. The living Eckmaster acts as an organizational head and as a guide to the aspirant's spiritual journey. The inner form of the living Eckmaster, known as the Mahanta, works with students in the dream state and during their spiritual exercises. The living Eckmaster descends from an unbroken line of Viraji masters. Any of these 900 plus masters may appear to spiritual seekers on the inner planes or in the physical world, often in disguise. The beggar you meet on the street may really be an Eckmaster. At one Eckankar seminar in Florida, a panhandler happened to station himself outside the hotel where the seminar was held. Eckists left and right were smiling at the guy, stopping for long chats, and tossing money into his cup. The perplexed beggar was in hog heaven, and who knows, he may have been Rebazar Tars. Writing this summary of beliefs, I consulted Eckankar materials, but I didn't need to. After giving lectures and teaching Eckankar classes for 10 years, I already knew them well. In Eckankar, there is a technique called the golden-tongued wisdom, in which you find spiritual guidance through an overheard conversation, a voice on the radio, or the lyrics of a popular song. A line will leap out and inspire you. "I'm a fool to want you," quivers Billie Holiday through my stereo speakers. Was I a fool to want Eckankar? I don't think so. In the early 70s, when I joined, I was dysfunctionally shy, a borderline agoraphobic, afraid to talk to sales ladies in department stores. Besides my straight A's, I had nothing to give me a sense of self-worth. In Eckankar, since everyone is soul, everyone is worthy. As Eckankar filled my life, I felt like I was entering Shangri-La, a new glistening world of love, of possibility open before me. I gave up drugs and my grades went down. While a few people I met were off the wall, Eckists in general made wonderful friends, kind, caring, non-judgmental. Operating as I do now in a professional arts world in which people want a resume before deciding whether to talk to you, I miss the support of the Eckankar community and the sex. Though Eckankar in no way encourages sexual contact among its members, with that degree of trust and the sense of two souls meeting, the sex was great. I was 21. My only regrets were that I sold all my rock albums to pay for my membership. Lane's research into Eckankar is meticulously documented. The making of a spiritual movement is, in fact, so well documented that at times it reads like a 200-page footnote. It lacks the wit, passion, and narrative drive of his other books. Lane, like his counterpart Houdini, seems shackled. Two figures emerge from the stilted style. The pro-teen Paul Twitchell and his young, vivacious wife Gail, who, after Twitchell's death, married his successor, Darwin Gross, in a dynasty-like power play that troubled and thrilled the faithful. This is an amazing article and it is so well written, and I would love to sit here and read the entire thing to you, word for word, but you would find that incredibly boring. I felt like what you've heard so far was very important to establish who David C. Lane is, and also to talk about Paul Twitchell's life. The article goes on to discuss in detail how Paul Twitchell basically made up several of the gurus that were in his past, and how they're a mixture of people that do exist, but people like Rebazar Tars do not exist, which we've talked about and will talk about more in future. But the link to the article is in the description down below. Please go and read the whole thing. It's fabulous. For the remaining of this video, I'm going to just show you what I think are the most important parts of this article. For example, when they discuss Paul Twitchell's death. I asked Lane to tell me about Twitchell's mysterious death. Many Eckists regard this death with the same mixture of awe and curiosity with which we regard the death of JFK. I figure Lane knows plenty about this, but he refuses to reveal details for publication and will only repeat the facts as listed on the death certificate. Twitchell died of a heart attack around 1 o'clock in the morning on September 17, 1971 in Cincinnati, Ohio. The story he tells me off the record, however, is filled with enough ardor and drama to qualify as an alternative ending to Citizen Kane. But Dave, I whine, why won't you talk about it on tape? Because I have a certain kind of respect for him, a kind of sweet affection. There's certain things I left out of the book, and one of them is the night Twitchell died. There's lots of stuff I know about Eckankar, lots of stuff that is real juicy and real scandalous. But I wanted to limit my book to some major salient features about plagiarism and cover-up. What I found was so obvious that anybody could have discovered it. It wasn't just David Lane's personal opinion. I have nice feelings toward Eckankar. I don't have a real axe to grind. Lane goes on to discuss John-Roger Hinkins, leader of the MSIA cult, and how he was in Eckankar, and how Lane is actually more scared of him than anybody else in the world. At a Hillcrest cafe, Lane confides, the people who scare me are John-Roger's people, not Eckankar's. John-Roger Hinkins, founder of the Church of the Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness, MSIA, pronounced Messiah, has gotten a lot of bad press lately. Last year, 1994, former cult member Peter McWilliams published a scathing All Life 102. What to do when your guru sues you. November's Vanity Fair linked Ariana Huffington's allegiance to Messiah to her husband's unsuccessful Senate campaign, and the March issue of Playboy ran a detailed expose. But Lane had the jump on all of them. When back in 1984 he wrote, The JR Controversy, a critical analysis of John-Roger Hinkins and Messiah. John-Roger was a follower of Eckankar, begins Lane. In '68 he was a convener, which means he held satsang classes in his home in Rosemead, California. After a year or so, he branched off and started his own group, Messiah, claiming that in 1963 he had a kidney stone operation and that after 9 days of being in a coma, he had been commissioned to be the mystical traveler consciousness. At first, Hinkins thought it was the legendary Rebizartars, who came to him on the inner planes and passed on the keys to the kingdom. But later, after seeing a photo of Radha Swami's guru Swan Singh, Hinkins decided that it was really Swan Singh who had given him the mantle. Browsing in a bookstore one day, Lane stumbled upon one of John-Roger's books and noticed it was very similar to Eckankar. You can imagine how I felt, exclaims Lane. This was in 76 or 77, and I was 20 years old, so it's like all the president's men. I wrote to him, and he wrote a real nice letter back, saying that we should get together and talk. This guy's pretty smart, because he knows that if he pays attention to me, that's a good way of buying me off, so he can spin doctor my research. He invited me to his house in Mandeville Canyon, a beautiful house, a mansion. I was very naive. The minute he saw me, he canceled all of his appointments and spent 6 hours with me. Lane leans across the table toward me and grins. I never thought he was gay until everybody said, "Hello! Looks like he likes you a little too much, Dave." One of his major disciples, Victor Toso, later revealed that he had kind of a quasi-crush on me. Did John-Roger ever make any moves on you? No. Okay, Dave. I was flattered that here was a spiritual master who was spending hours with me instead of dissing me or suing me. He wanted to know every dirty piece of laundry on Twitchell and Eckankar. He was obsessed. He used to send me Christmas cards. He gave me his personal phone number, and he offered me $5,000 to help with my research on Eckankar. Did you take any money? Lane shakes his head. No, I kind of thought he was a fraud, but at the time, he was being nice to me, so I wasn't in the mood to expose him. Well, the upshot of it is, we were friendly for 5 years. And then in 1983, 4 of his closest disciples defected. They knew what I had done with Eckankar, and they thought, well, he can do this with JR. So there was a secret meeting in a Santa Monica condominium with these defectors. Very top secret, for they were really scared of upsetting John-Roger. I taped them for 5 hours. The accusations leveled against Hinkins included embezzling money, plagiarizing from the teachings of Paul Twitchell and others, skirting zoning laws, illegally obtaining airfare discounts, setting up tape recorders throughout his house to obtain information that he would later use to appear psychic, and sexual misconduct. Lane pauses and thinks for a bit. This is where I've got to be careful. Everybody's sexuality is different than everybody else's. I imagine we have a wide spectrum. The problem is that John-Roger claims to be celibate. His disciples told me he would pick a guy every night out of the staff and claim that they needed to have sex with him in order to increase their aura. Or they needed, pardon my language, a rectal interphase in order to burn off karma. Interphase? He has this thing called aura interphasing, where you do aura balancing, soul balancing, etheric balancing. The disciples felt used and manipulated for spiritual reasons. After the secret meeting, Lane phoned Hinkins to ask him about these charges. He went nuts. The courtship was over. Man, it was a nasty conversation. I told him I didn't plan to write about him, but letters started going around the country saying that I was a gay FBI agent in San Diego, that I had researchers working for me that I wasn't paying. Some letters contained threats against me and my informants. In one, he refers to me as Lane the Widower. So then I wrote the JR Controversy for a new journal called Understanding Cults. When it came out, I got a 25-page letter from a group called the Coalition for Civil and Spiritual Freedom. It never existed. It was a P.O. box with John-Roger's own name signed to it. 4 or 5 months later, on October 5th, 1984, Lane's apartment in Del Mar was burglarized. Lane is convinced John-Roger was involved. I've played the clip of Lane discussing his burglarized home from when he was working at UC San Diego, and he came home and everything was all over the place, and there was a big note on a box that said no more, and his wife's personal diaries were stolen, and it was a big thing. So do check out my other content on that. In August 1988, the Los Angeles Times published an extensive 2-part critique of John-Roger's activities based on Lane's research. Lane also appeared on Gerardo Rivera's Now It Can Be Told. Geraldo was in New York, and I was on satellite hookup at Universal Studios in the San Fernando Valley. The Cadillac of cults. Are your tax dollars being spent by this group? So they interviewed me, and I had this rainbow tie on, and Geraldo and I were going at each other. I said, yeah, Geraldo, this guy robbed my house. He did this, he did this, he did that. All on national TV. I just went off on him. At this stage, Peter McWilliams, the guy who later wrote Life 102, was still pro John-Roger. So he was putting his hands on the camera. That kind of scene. When they tried to interview John-Roger. So you get this juxtaposition. Lane really going off on John-Roger and Mick Williams trying to protect JR's reputation. The article goes on to say how 3 local Eckists agreed to speak with Dottie, our author. 3 local Eckists agreed to speak with me. The first Eckist she speaks to is Charles Richards, a transpersonal psychologist out of Del Mar. He does a great job of explaining why people in cults such as Eckankar ignore the proof David Lane and other detractors have provided them with that this religion is fraudulent and even stolen, plagiarized. When I ask him what Eckankar's position is on Lane's research, Richards, who's been in Eckankar for 20 years, says he doesn't know. Basically, I feel that David Lane is making a name for himself by being an antagonist to Eckankar. Everybody has a right to pursue whatever interests they have. He focuses a lot on past things. Paul Twitchell and how much his writings look like the writings of a teaching Lane happens to be in. That's his axe to grind with Eckankar. You can get in a debate over whether one paragraph in one of Paul Twitchell's writings looks like a paragraph in somebody else's writings, but that has nothing to do with your spiritual experiences and the confirmation you get personally through the teachings and your work with the inner master. To me, if people want to get into those kinds of discussions, fine. And I'll kick it around with them for a while too, if they want to talk on that level. But the stuff that Lane goes after has nothing to do, for me, with the validity of the teachings. When I was in Eckankar, one of the things that I really liked about it was its respect for other faiths and that there was no pressure to get anybody to join. Richard responds, Sri Harold Klemp has taken a special effort to make it clear that we accept the value and the need for all different paths and religions, because people operate at different states of consciousness. Eckankar is not for everybody. The Temple of Eck in Chanhassen, Minnesota, is open to people of all faiths to come, to attend the worship services, maybe just to enhance their own beliefs. It's even available for community events. Eckankar is still very much open to and supportive of whatever religion a person belongs to. In fact, we find more in common with people of other religious or spiritual beliefs than we have with people who don't have any religious or spiritual beliefs, simply because they have a commitment to spirit on some level. I'm curious about how Eckankar has changed since I left it in the early 80s. Well, Richard says slowly and thoughtfully in a charming southern accent, I think the present living Eckmaster has not changed the essence of the teachings, which is basically about self-realization and God-realization in the most direct way the individual can achieve that. Rather, he's tried to make the teachings more accessible to the average person who's interested in religion or spirituality, but may not be familiar with a lot of the terms that we've used in the past. What alternative terms have been developed? Instead of talking about the contemplations or the Nurat or the Surat technique for the light and sound, we just say we do spiritual exercises. They're very much like physical exercises, but they're for soul, to strengthen soul's connection with spirit. The spiritual exercises are a form of prayer. We have a different focus and intent. That's all. We talk about the hue as a prayer song or a love song to God, instead of saying it's a chant or mantra. In the past, we thought that this was our little private esoteric religion. So Harold said, hey, why should we make this difficult for people? Let's try to make it easy for them to at least understand what we're doing, what we're about, and what the potential of the teaching is. A lot of people would see Eckankar as a cult. How would you address that issue? Richards takes a long, reticent pause before he answers. People typically define cults, first of all, as based around worshipping a personality. We don't do that in Eckankar. Secondly, we don't have any kind of communal living. Eckists are all over the world and in different walks of life, and from different political orientations, different socioeconomic levels. There's always been a complete reliance on the individual's own inner guides and not some pre-established protocol that everybody has to operate under. Since its early days, Eckankar has always really been a religion. It's had to be recognized as such in this country to operate as a non-profit organization. When you look at what we do relative to other religions, it basically is no different. We just have a different doctrine and somewhat different beliefs. Richards flashes me his dimples. We figure if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, we might as well call it a duck. And we figure if it looks like a cult, sounds like a cult, we might as well call it a cult. Dottie goes on to interview two more Eckists, Kevin McMahon and Bettina Yellman, both who defend the movement based on personal spiritual experiences and who don't seem to appreciate David Lane's work. Now, I'm not doing this article much justice. I do recommend that you go and you read the entire article yourself. But did I also tell you guys about how Jerry Mulvin was a part of Eckankar? Because this article does, and that's another important part. It's a beautiful sunny day, sitting at our outside table high above Camino del Mar, surrounded by sky and ocean. I feel as if we're gods feasting on petty human concerns. I ask, ever so casually, is it true that you have some friends who are Eckists? Oh yeah. How do they justify that you are doing things that might damage the group? They differentiate the message from the medium. They say the message works for me. The contemplation works for me. Paul Twitchell's the past. We've evolved out of that. They say you can never damage the X spirit because it's life. So I may be damaging the organization, but the real essence of Eckankar is not the organization. It's the Eck, that inner spirit. How did you meet these people? They read my book. One interesting guy I met was Jerry Mulvin. He was a pro bowler as well as a higher initiate in Eckankar. In 1979, he called me from Northridge where he was living at his girlfriend's aunt's house. He'd read the book and wanted me to visit him. After I'd talked to him for a couple of hours, Jerry said, Dave, why don't you start your own religion? With all this information you have, you could start your own thing. I go, Jerry, I can't do that. Third eye patch, turban, the flowing robe, I can't do it. 2 years later, I got a letter from a guy in Canada saying he discovered a genuine guru. So I asked, who is this enlightened being? It was Jerry Mulvin. He offshooted from Eckankar and founded this religion called the Divine Science of Light and Sound. He's now in Scottsdale, Arizona. For $100 per year, he gives you the divine connection. If he can't take your soul back to God, he improves your bowling game, money back guarantee. We both laughed so loudly at Lane's joke. The couple at the next table, who had been covertly eyeing the tape recorder, stare at us openly. I wrote to Jerry, "Way to go, Jerry. 2 years ago you were living at your girlfriend's aunt's house, not making much money on the pro bowling scene, and now you're God." Yeah, and that cult is also still going. There are a lot of people that have been in Eckankar that have went and started new cults. And what was Jerry's response? Lane rolled his eyes. "Classic," he said. "Some of us live the spiritual life, others intellectualize it." Signed, The Master. Another former Eckist named Gary Olson started the Master Path. He's touring the Southwest as we speak. Another man named Sri Michael Turner in Tucson claims to be the 974th living master of the Midnight Sun. I keep discovering more and more offshoots in India as well as here. It's like a virus. It keeps reproducing itself. That it does, and it just continues on. Talking to these Eckists, the conscious, the rational, jaded Dodie faded out, and this other little Dodie inside me that was starting to feel an incredible seduction. I wanted Bettina Yellman's calm. I wanted Charles Richards' benevolence. I wanted Kevin McMahon's assurance. I like you and I'm enjoying our talk, but nothing you're saying is very seductive. Do you know what I mean? Lane drives me back to Hillcrest. In my copy of The Making of a Spiritual Movement, he signs himself the Calforce Dave. The Calforce, remember, is the power of negativity. Lane can be such a card. Another interesting part of this article is when Lane and Dottie go and see Darwin Gross. The mastership of Darwin Gross is a black cloud in Eckankar history, a history that Eckankar wants to erase. Nowhere in any of the Eckankar press materials is Gross mentioned. I wonder how long it takes new Eckist to even learn of his existence. When word got around that I was doing this article, I got an odd phone call from Don Ginn, the California Regional Ex-Spiritual Aide. He didn't bring up David Lane, but he requested that I not dwell on Darwin Gross. I really hadn't planned to write about him at all. Gross's rise to power was steeped in controversy from the beginning. When Paul Twitchell suddenly died in September 1971, he left no word as to who his successor should be. Then his widow, Gail Atkinson, had a vision in the night, in which Twitchell named Gross. In October, at a seminar in Las Vegas, Gross was revealed to be the new living Eckmaster, when Atkinson walked over to him and handed him a blue carnation. Gross actually received the mantle on the inner planes when he was handed, not a flower, but the rod of power. Various Eckists say they witnessed the ceremony. In one illustration, the rod of power is depicted as a glowing white wand. When a group of Eckists and I went to see the Bloomington, Indiana premiere of Star Wars, we were thrilled by the lightsabers of the Jedi Knights. They looked just like the Rod of Power. To top it off, their white helmets bore an insignia that was remarkably similar to Eckankar's circular EK logo. Star Wars was no ordinary action flick, we concluded, but a profound spiritual saga. May the Force be with you. Because Gross had been in Eckankar less than 2 years, his appointment shocked and disturbed many Eckists. Some left the movement. A few months later, Gross and Twitchell's widow married, sending more ripples of confusion throughout the fold. Not long afterward, I joined Eckankar, unaware of the dissension. Whenever I saw Gross and Atkinson, I would be seated in an auditorium, surrounded by thousands of avid followers, each hoping at some point to receive the darshan, the master's gaze. Gross was in the habit of wearing light blue leisure suits, and men throughout the audience mimicked his attire. Outsiders would think they had stumbled into a convention of traveling salesmen. My husband, who had never heard of Atkinson before, sees her as a kind of 60s super vixen, like Pussy Galore. But the woman I remember was mousy with a broad smile. No Bond girl was she. Ellen Burstyn, maybe. I would raise my head to the stage in rapt silence, devouring every word the Grosses spoke. I could almost picture the legendary Rod of Power in Darwin's hand. They were gods to me. And one doesn't question the mating patterns of gods. Gross and Gail Twitchell divorced in 1978. In October 1981, Eckists were again floored when Gross announced his resignation as the living Eckmaster, but not without first signing a contract that gave him a salary of $65,000 for life, full medical and dental coverage, use of a company car, and entertainment expenses. His new title was President of Eckankar. The Rod of Power was passed on to Harold Clem. Within 2 years, Clem fired Gross, accusing him of negativity, spiritual decay, and embezzlement. Apparently, says Lane, Darwin took $2.5 million and put it into a front corporation in Oregon called Dharma Corporation. He basically took Eckankar's money while saying it was really for Eckankar purposes. Excommunicated from Eckankar, his lifetime agreement terminated, Gross was suddenly penniless. His books were suppressed, and he was forbidden to associate himself with Eckankar or Eckankar teaching in any way, including the use of trademark terms such as Eck, EK, living Eckmaster, and Eckankar. When Gross protested, he was slapped with a lawsuit for business impropriety and copyright infringement. Gross continued to work as a spiritual master, with a small group of devoted followers, many of them former Eckists. He publishes books through an organization called Be Good to Yourself, located in Las Vegas, the time of this article in 1995. Home study discourses and musical tapes are also available. Much of Gross's current teaching center around the easy listening jazz he performs on the Vibes. Gross's uplifting music is claimed to have miraculous healing powers. The program Lane and I attend at the Best Western, Hanalei, is called The Universal Basics of Life Through Music. It costs $35 at the door. Saturday afternoon, when we arrive at the hotel, Lane keeps disappearing into the bathroom. He and Gross have been sparring since 1977. As late as December 1993, Gross sent out a memo to all his readers defending Paul Twitchell and the corporation he started against Lane's attacks. Gross's fastidious avoidance of the copyright term Eckankar is noticeably awkward and circuitous. Lane has countered with a point-by-point rebuttal. When God responds, Sri Darwin Gross versus David Lane, which he's included in his new book, Gakko Came from Venus. While Lane is in the bathroom, I try to no avail to get permission to photograph the event. Gross's young, perky assistant Dawn explains, frankly, there have been lawsuits. She agrees to provide us with an official photograph of Gross at the Vibes, and I leave to find Lane. He's sitting on a couch in the small lobby outside the conference room. I urge, come on, Dave, it's starting. I practically have to pull him into the concert. We take our seats among the 50 or so other seekers, many of whom have flown in for the event. Don is finishing an applied kinesiology demonstration of the power of Gross's music. A volunteer raises one arm straight out to the side, and Dawn easily pushes it down. Then she asks him to think about Gross's music as he again holds out his arm. This time, the arm doesn't budge no matter how hard she pushes down on it. See, she exclaims. We close our eyes and chant Who together for several minutes. Gross enters and takes his position behind the gold-toned Vibes. Remembering him in his better days, thin and attractive, I am shocked by the corpulent, aging man standing before me coughing. He reminds me of the bloated near-death Elvis, only fatter and older. He jokes about his Nevada cold, blaming it on the dust from the Indian burial grounds being dug up to build housing. Lane looks like he's swallowing a mouth, grinning and biting his finger. Gross's movements are frail and slow as he removes his dark blue jacket to reveal a short-sleeved white shirt and tan pants held up with wide red suspenders. Accompanied by keyboardist and devotee Ron Kurz, Gross begins with Blues in E-flat. The music is great, lethargic, and soothing. The kind of music one should listen to in a cocktail lounge with an umbrella drink. Gross smiles to himself as he hits the Vibes. He seems gently ecstatic, but so tired. When he finishes the song, he takes off his shoes to be closer to the keys. The atmosphere in the room is homey and protective. After a few more tunes, Gross and Kurz are joined by vocalist Kim Driggs, an attractive woman with dark shaggy hair. In a husky voice, smooth as malt whiskey, she sings, Don't blame me for falling in love with you. I'm under your spell, but how can I help it? This is a double edge to this torch song, from the way she keeps glancing affectionately over at Gross. It is the master spell that Driggs can't be blamed for falling under. When she begins her next selection, My Funny Valentine, I lose all objectivity. Valentine's Day, my birthday, is only 3 days away. I vacantly stare at Lane's tanned, hairy legs, nostalgic for the boyfriends who played this song for me. The loss of my old loves and Gross's loss of status become merged in an ineffable sadness. As she finishes, Gross says, She can belt one out, can't she? I hope you all had your seatbelts fastened. Even more moving is Driggs's rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Gross sits this one out on a rattan stool, his arms folded nodded over his huge stomach, lost in thought. When Driggs gets to the line, away above the chimney tops, that's where you'll find me, I focus on Gross's bulbous belly and red suspenders. He looks like Santa, I think, like a fallen Santa. Lane has tears in his eyes. I lean and whisper to him, you are so opaque. I am surprised by my cruelty. Sitting in this pathetic room with its riotously floral turquoise and purple carpet, it feels as if nobody's dreams will ever come true. I keep waiting for Gross to give a speech, but he never does. We zone out on lounge music for an hour and a half. Then Don walks to the front of the room and says, that's it. I ask Lane if he's going to introduce himself. Lane shakes his head. I don't want to tweak his day. He's got his music. He's having a good time. So I walk over to Gross myself and shake his hand. I used to be an Eckankar, I tell him. Discomfort spreads across his face as I continue. You were the master most of the time I was in it. Holding my hand, he looks deep into my eyes and says, I'm still the master. I always have been. I never stopped, not even for a minute, even though they, pardon my expression, treated me like shit. As I walk away, he yells after me, hang in there. Sri Haralclem has immense financial resources available to guide the spiritual lives of his tens of thousands of believers. Gail Atkinson, who has long since broken with Eckankar, is said to live in wealthy seclusion in Palm Springs. Lane and I drive to La Jolla for lead-in upscale Mexican food. Sipping his virgin strawberry margarita, Lane says, I got a sense of authenticity when he played his vibes. Like that's who he really was, a musician, instead of trying to be a master. One of the reasons he may have relinquished his spiritual role to Harold is that it didn't jibe with him. He may like the trappings, but not the actual duty of it. I really enjoyed the music, but it was kind of sad. Life's kind of sad. 40 people in a hotel named Hanalei in San Diego for a man who used to draw thousands. He's big, coughing, not in the best of health. And he doesn't have any money, yet it has a sweetness to it. It was like an outpost of spirituality. I felt the world has gone by, but these people are still there. The article ends with an excerpt from a letter sent to informants who spoke with David Lane during his research into John-Roger Hinkins. This is what the letter said. Scumbags! A friend from La Jolla gave me a copy of the article that David Lane is writing called the JR Controversy. All that junk you told him made me sick. All that junk you gave Lane to write down came out of your own filthy minds. And mouse, and you know filthy mouse must be cleaned out, don't you? If I were any of you, I'd be very careful where I go and what I do and who I talk to. You wouldn't want anyone to get hurt now, would you? Don't you all have innocent friends visit you and live near you? I'd sign this, but you scumbags aren't worth much more of my effort. Just a bit more effort, and then it ends. It's going to be interesting to see how this information gets back to me. In the days of old, the barrier of bad news to the king was done away with. Huh? I also have the evidence that David Christopher Lane is an informant for the FBI and is being financed by them to do his dirty research. DC, the watchers who are everywhere. Yeah, apparently I'm also an FBI informant over here in Canada who's also being financed to do research on cults and MLMs. So it's all of us. Woohoo! Go us! And that is it for this article. Former Eckankar revisits the movement by Dodie Bellamy, published on June 22nd, 1995. If you got through this entire thing, then you are up to date with the start of Eckankar, especially if you have watched my previous videos and streams on this topic. I will leave several in the description down below along with the link to this article. Please do read the article. It is absolutely fabulous, very well written, very interesting. I'm thinking of releasing the Eckist experiences in a separate couple of videos. Let me know what you think about that and tell me all of your thoughts on this down below. Have you ever been a part of Eckankar? Do you know anyone who is? Maybe send them this video. Stay skeptical, stay safe, and I'll see you all very soon with another one. Until next time, I love all your faces, bye!
Queen of Karma.